Survivors share emotional stories.
And I can just see him shooting at everyone.
What it took to save dozens of lives in the Orlando nightclub under attack. Plus, new information about the investigation, what the killer did in the weeks before that attack. And more political fallout. Democrats seek gun control as Republicans focus on radical Islam. And Christian unity put to the test. Ed Pentin explains why an Orthodox meeting is significant to Catholic-Orthodox relations. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 14th, 2016.
There was like 25 people just toppled on top of each other, trying to get out of this door frame. Probably people were literally stuck in there.
I look over and there's just bodies everywhere. We're all in pain.
Survivors of the Orlando nightclub shooting share the horror they faced. Good evening, I'm Brian Patrick. We are learning more tonight about the victims and the investigation. We're also covering the political fallout. Wyatt Goolsby begins our team coverage from the newsroom with stories of survival. Wyatt?
Brian, doctors at the Orlando Regional Medical Center say they are working round the clock. They are treating 27 of the survivors, 6 of whom are critically ill.
I'm just there laying down. I'm thinking, I'm next, I'm dead.
26-year-old Angel Colon feels blessed to be alive. He described how just after 2 a.m. Sunday, he was shot 3 times in the leg, then trampled by the crowd, shattering the bones in his left leg.
I hear him come back and he's shooting everyone that's already dead on the floor, making sure they're dead. I can hear the shotguns closer, and I look over and he shoots the girl next to me. So I don't know how, but by the glory of God, he shoots towards my head, but it hits my hand. And then he shoots me again, and it hits the side of my hip.
Colon played dead, not moving, until the police arrived. Colon says he cannot understand why anyone would carry out such a brutal attack.
This person had to be heartless, ruthless, just seeing all these bodies everywhere, and this person is just enjoying doing this.
The nightclub was only 4 blocks from the hospital. Doctors say there was no heads up, no advance warning. Patients like Colon just started showing up.
We didn't know quite what was about to hit us.
Doctors and nurses scrambled, treating the full gamut of injuries.
Wounds to the chest, wounds to the abdomen and pelvis area. The trauma bay was very full. We had patients in every corner.
Trauma surgeons warned the Orlando community that their work is far from over. They say the death toll could rise. Colon says he's thankful for the doctors, the police, and the outpouring of support from across the country.
I want the world to know that our community we are together. We are helping each other. We're getting through this together. I've seen so much love from everyone, not to only me, but to the other victims, to the families, and we really have each other's backs.
During that speech, Colon turned to the doctors and nurses and said, "I will love you guys forever." One doctor described Sunday morning as both the worst and the best day of his career, reflecting on both the tragedy as well as the hospital's response. Brian?
Wyatt, survivors' guilt plagues some of those who came out alive. Luis Barbano can't understand how he lived when so many others were gunned down.
Someone told me you were given a second chance at life. And I said, is that what this is? Because I regret it. I regret having the second chance. People have tried reaching out to me saying, like, God's got a plan for you, everything's gonna be okay. And I'm like, he had a plan for everybody. I don't know why,
Barbano says he is unable to sleep thinking about the chaos and horror of that night. Friends and family members of the victims are struggling to cope with their loss. Kasha Arroyo says she was desperate for news about her friend Shane Tomlinson, then found out he died.
I was here all day, all night, and I waited and I waited and I didn't sleep. And then the next morning I just waited for the names and this was on there.
The FBI is now investigating reports that the gunman frequented the gay nightclub he attacked and also used gay dating apps. Omar Mateen's father says his son was not gay, that he hated gays and got upset when he saw 2 men kissing. It's not clear yet if Mateen was scouting out the nightclub or actually wrestling with his own sexual identity. He pledged allegiance to ISIS during that attack.
Looks as if the gunman acted alone, that he was terrorist inspired. He was not directed from a terrorist organization overseas. But the FBI is aggressively, vigorously investigating this right now with a number of agents on the ground there in Orlando.
And President Obama meets with his national security team today, discussing the U.S.-led campaign against the Islamic State group. Meanwhile, Donald Trump accuses the president of putting enemies of the U.S. ahead of his allies and the American people. More from our chief White House correspondent and political director, Lauren Ashburn.
Brian, in a sometimes angry, sometimes somber address, the president reiterated the need for stricter gun laws and criticized Republicans for partisan yapping, which he called a political distraction. And he directly addressed his opponents who call for him to use the term radical Islamic terrorism. He says calling it by another name is not going to make it go away.
We have to make it harder for people who want to kill Americans to get their hands on weapons of war that let them kill dozens of innocents.
President Barack Obama is challenging Congress to reinstate the assault weapons ban. He's also rebuking Donald Trump for making an issue out of him not using the words radical Islamic terrorism.
There's not been a moment in my 7.5 years as president where we have not been able to pursue a strategy because we didn't use the label radical Islam.
In Pittsburgh, Hillary Clinton seemed to be reading from the same talking points.
First, he is fixated on the words radical Islam. Now, I must say I find this strange. Is Donald Trump suggesting that there are magic words that once uttered will stop terrorists from coming after us?
As recently as Friday, the administration touted its ISIS strategy, saying it's lost ground in Syria and Iraq, and the coalition has killed more than 100 ISIS leaders. But Donald Trump says it's not enough. He wants a ban on Muslims entering the U.S. He tweeted, "America must now get very tough, very smart, and very vigilant. We cannot admit people into our country without extraordinary screening." The president will head to Orlando on Thursday. On Capitol Hill, the heads of the FBI, Homeland Security, and the National Counterterrorism Center are giving a classified briefing to all the members of the House. Capitol Hill reporter Jason Calvi joins us now with more. Jason?
Lauren, the Senate will have their own classified briefing tomorrow. Today, Speaker Ryan addressed what you mentioned, Trump's proposal to ban Muslims from entering the country. Today, once again, Speaker Ryan says that does not reflect the country's principles. He says it's smarter to have a security test to get into the country, not a religious one. Speaker Ryan was interrupted on the House floor last night.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Chart 5312, a bill to amend the high-performance computing...
Democrats demand stricter gun laws. This right after a moment of silence on the House floor. Arizona Democrat Ruben Gallego skipped it.
I prayed at home for the victims of Orlando, but the fact that we have consistently prayed and then done nothing afterwards, I think it's just an empty gesture, and I just didn't want to take part in that type of action anymore. I want us to actually pass common sense gun reform to actually start saving lives.
He and fellow Democrats support several proposals.
No fly, no buy. Stop individuals with terrorist tendencies or having been investigated by the FBI on the terrorist watch list from buying any weapon, period.
Democratic senators say they'll force a vote on the bill. Republican senators already shot it down in December. They're critical again this time, but
we're open. Nobody wants terrorists to have firearms. And we're open to serious suggestions from the experts as to what we might be able to do to be helpful.
But many Republicans are opposed to stricter gun laws.
Well, if guns are outlawed, this would change. It'd be only outlaws and terrorists would have guns. They will get guns.
Republicans instead target terrorism.
This was another act of war against America by radical Islam. At the same time, let's also be clear. Members of the LGBT community were the targets.
The Government Accountability Office estimates that from 2004 until last year, 2,400 people on the terrorist watch list tried to buy guns or explosives. They estimate 91% of those sales actually went through. Now, the gunman, the Orlando shooter, was on the terrorist watch list. but for about 10 months, but then he was cleared of it. This terrorist watch list is overseen by the FBI. It was founded after the September 11th terrorist attacks. Brian?
Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, who heads the Vatican's doctrine office, reacts to the terror attack in Orlando.
The terrorism we have now is terrorism which say we are sent by God, and is absolutely not only crazy but is a big sin to speak about God and to justify all this what is against human life and human welfare.
Cardinal Mueller's comments came at a news conference today about a document his office compiled on new lay movements within the church. People in Rome joined the outpouring of prayer and support for the victims of the Orlando nightclub shooting. The American Catholic community of Santa Susana plans a prayer vigil at St. Patrick's Church on Thursday. This follows last night's vigil in Orlando. Thousands gathering in support of the victims and survivors. Mayor Buddy Dyer says his city is mourning and will continue to stand with the victims' families and friends. Due Sizemore says he lost 6 friends in that shooting.
I feel like there's a burden that's been taken off, and I feel like I can leave here and start to heal. And it's the beginning. It's the beginning of a long road ahead of us, but hopefully tonight will help a lot of people. It helped me.
Many people have been leaving flowers, candles, and notes as a memorial. Dr. Stephen Bucci, former Army Special Forces officer, now foreign and national security expert with the Heritage Foundation, is with us. How was Pentin able to convince the FBI that he wasn't a terror threat and was taken off that list?
Well, when the FBI did their investigation, it was a few years ago. At that time, he may not have had any terrorist tendencies then. He obviously had an anger problem, but we still don't know whether this final motivation to take these actions just came up very recently, or he had them then and he was able to just convince the investigators that he was not a threat.
So it took 3 hours, really, for the SWAT team to arrive. You're a Special Forces officer. You've got experience in this. How could that have been?
Well, since the Columbine shooting, the protocol for these type situations is to go in as soon as you have sufficient force to do it. You don't wait to just keep building the force. Sufficient force can, in some cases, be 2 men. In this case, they made a decision to wait a little longer, I think because of the weapons that he had and the fact that the officers that showed up first only had handguns. It's kind of tough to second guess those guys, but they're going to be reviewing all of their procedures to see if they missed it by not going in sooner or not.
You heard all the arguments of, what we need to do to stop this. Can we stop this, what they're calling homegrown terrorism? Some people deny that it's that, but is there anything we can do to protect our citizens?
This kind of lone wolf or remotely radicalized person are the hardest threats to stop. There's no trail beforehand that law enforcement or intelligence can grab onto and say, hey, this guy's going to be a problem. If they find it, it's luck. It's very difficult to stop it preemptively, though law enforcement and intelligence are sure trying to find better ways to do it.
If you were in charge of all this, did you have any thoughts how you'd approach it?
Well, I think you have to start running into changes to the way we do surveillance domestically. It's really going to turn into a debate as to how much of our individual rights we want to give up. There's a trade-off there, and that's a very, very difficult debate for a democracy like ours.
That is a very important point. Dr. Steve Bucci with the Heritage Foundation, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, some good news for David Daleiden about his undercover Planned Parenthood videos and the Texas abortion law. We explore the case before the Supreme Court rules on it. Thank you for joining us this Tuesday evening, June 14th. I'm Brian Patrick. Pro-life activist David Daleiden gets some good news today. A misdemeanor charge of attempts to buy human organs is dismissed by a Texas judge. Attorneys for Daleiden called the dismissal a victory for the pro-life movement. Daleiden still faces felony charges of tampering with a governmental record. Prosecutors say he used fake driver's licenses to conceal his identity while recording his undercover Planned Parenthood videos. Lauren Ashburn asked White House spokesman Josh Earnest about the charges being dismissed today.
An indictment was dismissed against David Daleiden and the Center for Medical Progress today for taking videos of a Planned Parenthood employee talking about selling fetal parts. Is this a good time to look at what Planned Parenthood does and says in selling fetal baby parts?
Planned Parenthood is an organization that provides needed health care services to millions of Americans. This is a valuable service that many Americans rely on. The administration's also made clear that there are important rules and laws consistent with our moral obligations that are on the books, and we expect everybody to follow them. I know the Planned Parenthood has indicated that they do follow them, but I'd refer you to them for a more specific statement about that.
White House spokesman Josh Earnest, and the Supreme Court could rule any day on its first abortion regulations case in nearly a decade. It involves a Texas pro-life law requiring abortion facilities to meet certain medical standards. Marjorie Dannenfelser is president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Marjorie, what's at the heart of this law in Texas?
It's really equal protection of women's health under the law. Only women can have an abortion, and all of these clinics are giving thousands of abortions every day. And these clinics are filthy, state after state after state, including Texas. The horror stories are endless, and I don't see NARAL or Planned Parenthood doing anything to clean up those clinics, but I do see them fighting for the institution of abortion, but not for the rights of women.
What case did the SBA list make in its friend of the court brief that was filed?
Well, we made that exact case, and we really called upon the other side to really come to some common ground with us. This is a case of looking out for the interests of women. We're not even going after the abortion right, which we should be. But in this case, we're simply going after abortion clinics who can't lift a finger to get up to some standards, some minimum health standards to keep women safe. Filthy instruments, not unclean bedding, improper disposal of all sorts of implements that are then not sterilized correctly. This is not worthy of any woman under any procedure, certainly someone who was in a situation like that.
After the conviction of Philadelphia's Kermit Gosnell, you would think that this would be common ground for both sides on this issue, the health of women.
In fact, it is common ground. And again, the commitment to the institution of abortion, making sure that abortion is proliferating in this nation, is what the abortion lobby wants. And they are not focused on the health of women, despite what they say over and over and over again. This is the war on women. This really is in these clinics.
In the absence of Justice Antonin Scalia, this could be a 4-4 tie. What happens if it is?
Well, a 4-4 tie is a win for us, and it means that clinics across the country can still be, we can still go after them for the same types of violations. Things like in Delaware. This is the one that really gets me, Brian. In Delaware, a bunch of Planned Parenthood nurses came out and said, we can't stand this anymore. This assembly line, meat market style of abortion has to end, and we agree.
The Susan B. Anthony List, Marjorie Dannenfelser. Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you.
Coming up, Ed Pentin explains why the attempt at Christian unity may suffer a setback. And equality for women. The Obama administration promotes a new plan.
Possono conoscere Dio. Vieni, vieni, vieni.
Pope Francis calls a young girl courageous after inviting her to join him on stage. The Vatican releasing this video on Instagram today. Francis spoke about the richness of diversity during his audience with people gathered for this weekend's Jubilee for the Sick and Disabled. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, the White House holds its first ever Women's Summit today, focusing on equal pay, expanded sick leave, and education.
If we're truly a nation of family values, we wouldn't put up with the fact that many women can't even get a paid day off to give birth.
President Obama says we should guarantee paid maternity and paternity leave. Republican congressional leaders balk at his proposal, not wanting to burden small business. First Lady Michelle Obama and Oprah Winfrey spoke at today's Women's Summit. The Russian Orthodox Church will not participate in a historic meeting of the world's Orthodox churches. That meeting, due to start on Sunday in Crete, would be the first in more than a millennium. Ed Pentin is Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Ed, why is the Russian Orthodox Church pulling out?
Okay, Brian, well, it's really because the Bulgarian Orthodox Church were the first ones really to leave or decide they didn't want to attend the council, and the Russian Orthodox Church, which is the biggest member of the Orthodox churches, said that if they're not going to take part, then we're not going to take part. We want everybody to take part in this very historic council. So they're saying that unless that happens, it's best to postpone the meeting.
Can you give us a snapshot of the Orthodox churches?
Sure, they are 14 autocephalous churches, which means they're basically independent. They have their own sort of jurisdiction, and they don't have a sort of centralized authority, which means that they're basically 14 separate Orthodox churches, and they're rather disparate in that sense.
So why is this council so important? What's the significance and the purpose of it?
Well, it's really related to that fact that they are so separate. They want to sort of encourage unity, strengthen unity between them, and also help better relations outside the Orthodox churches. And so that's really the main purpose of the meeting. It's a very historic one. It hasn't been held for so many years. And they feel that it's time now to bring them together into a sort of more unified body.
And why is it important to Catholic Orthodox relations?
Well, that's also related to this because the Catholic Church obviously can deal better when the Orthodox Church is one single body, and they can deal with them, as one entity rather than all these disparate groups. And so I think for the Catholic Church, they're very keen to see that this council helps foster unity, and so, in so doing, helps strengthen relations between the Catholic and Orthodox churches, which have been probably the strongest they've ever been since the Great Schism of 1054.
Ed Pentin with EWTN's National Catholic Register joining us from Rome. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Brian.
And after the Orlando mass shooting, you might wonder, does the Catholic Church support gun control? The U.S. bishops have been outspoken about reducing gun violence. After the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, bishops released several policy proposals. They urge Congress to support policies that require universal background checks for all gun purchases, limit civilian access to high-capacity weapons, make gun trafficking a federal crime, and improve access to mental health care for those who may be prone to violence. Father Thomas Petri is Vice President and Academic Dean at the Dominican House of Studies here in Washington. Is church teaching clear at all about gun control?
Thanks for having me on, Brian. And I know many Catholics, when we have these debates, would wish that the church would say one way or the other and come down on their side of the debate. But in fact, the church's teaching is not clear on the issue of private gun ownership, for instance. The church teaches that there can be a legitimate self-defense, even by lethal means, but never defines what sort of lethal means might be used.
So in this case of self-defense, what about the commandment, thou shalt not kill?
Certainly, thou shalt not kill has always historically been understood to refer to killing innocent persons. And we balance the commandment with also the preservation of life. And everyone has a right to defend their life and to defend the lives of those under their charge, the lives of their spouses, the lives of their children, anyone whose life that they have authority over or in a position to protect.
Has church teaching adapted to these evolving modern weapons we have today?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in terms of war and military combat, the church is very clear that weapons of mass destruction, and as well we might say, thou shalt not kill, indiscriminate killing of innocents is obviously immoral, gravely sinful. And so the church understands that weapons of mass destruction and indiscriminate killing are intrinsically evil.
This is a very divisive debate, especially right now. How would you guide us on it?
Well, I think that we have to understand that governments have a right to protect their citizens, and they have a right to legislate. The U.S. bishops have called for various legislative moves to protect and to be sure that those who are able to purchase guns and have guns are using them for the right purposes, for hunting and for self-defense. But we also have a right to protect our own lives and the lives of those we love. And I would say with regard to this shooting in Orlando, we pray for the victims, and anytime this happens, it's an opportunity for us to remember that for each of us every day is a possibility that we might meet our Maker, and we should always be prepared.
Thank you for that reminder. Father Thomas Petri from the Dominican House of Studies. We look forward to seeing you on Morning Glory on EWTN Radio in the morning.
It's going to be great. Thanks.
And until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.